I can remember when I was in Paris. So I don't speak French. I had never been to Paris before. And I remember when I was placed in this situation where I had no reference points. I didn't know, I couldn't read the maps. I didn't know how to get to my hotel. I didn't know the currency. So every reference point I had was gone. And all that was left was me, like me. And I literally felt all of those layers of me, all of the masks, all of the expectations, all the labels, everything just melted off me.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Wendy Beth Cozzens, and we're going to be talking about vulnerability and overcoming very challenging obstacles to lead a joy-filled life. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Wendy Beth Cozzens. She goes by the name Wendy Beth, and that's where you can find her on Amazon to get her book called Living Blueprint, A True Story, 5 Principles to Creating an Authentic, Joy-Filled Life. Wendy's story is quite remarkable. She is a survivor of a suicide attempt, and we talk about the power of being vulnerable and illuminating the truth for yourself in a way that is incredibly freeing. Wendy Beth works with a lot of people as a coach, coming from a very deep spiritual place. So let's get into this and hear Wendy Beth's story. Here she is, Wendy Beth Cozzens. All right, Wendy Beth Cozzens is here with me. She's in Stockton, California, visiting family. And I'm in Los Angeles at my house. And we're going to be talking about a lot of good stuff. We had a little pre-conversation about people wanting community and love and all these wonderful things and safety. And one of the things we're going to talk about is vulnerability. That's, I think, is the theme of today's show. I want to hear you talk about this first because I have some thoughts on vulnerability and the power of it. I'm going to just say that. I'll give you a hint of what I think about it right there. So what are you doing with vulnerability? How are you getting that idea out there, and how is it helpful?
I just published my book, and my book is very transparent and very vulnerable because it's the most vulnerable I've ever been. But I really have a powerful message, and I really believe that the best way for me to share this message is to share parts of myself that other people connect to. And that's where that real, raw life experience, when we share those moments with each other, it's almost impossible to not connect.
I want to say this about vulnerability. When I'm the most vulnerable, I feel a little embarrassed. That's the first thing I feel. Like, I can't believe I just said that, even though it's the truth. And even though I was scared to do it, now I'm a little embarrassed that I said it, because what's going to happen? I don't regret it, though. I don't regret it when it happens, because like you say, when you do those kinds of things, other people go, oh, it gives permission for other people to be, what they may have thought of as less than or weaker, or they have a little shame around something, but it actually has the opposite effect. It is, and it's a buzzword now, but it's the truest word is empowering.
Well, I think it's interesting. I feel like sometimes when we're vulnerable, it depends on who we're with. And I feel like we kind of learn to gauge that. And I know that there have been times when I've been very vulnerable, I always, when I look back, it's okay. But in the moment, if I'm vulnerable with someone who is not willing to meet me there, it can feel really uncomfortable. And
It's the worst.
I can regret it for a little bit, but then in retrospect, I'm never sorry for telling the truth.
Yeah, it is truth. And the thing about it, when somebody doesn't respond in a way that feels safe or whatever, it really gives you an indication. They're telling you who they are. And so you really get a clear picture of, oh, I thought you actually had a more of an open heart than you do. I'm not saying you got to hate the person, but you kind of go, oh, all right, well, now I know that's not somebody I'm going to ever go to again, or probably won't go to again with these kinds of thoughts or ideas or feelings. So you do get a very clear picture of someone's ability to be kind, really, is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. I feel like it is amazing. It is the best information for creating relationship.
So, what is the title of the book?
Living Blueprint, a True Story. And half of it is my story, and half of it's a journey for someone else to be able to create their living blueprint. And I am very transparent in this book, and I am very vulnerable.
Do you want to share some of what's in there? Just to, or you don't have to. Somebody that is curious about the book, what are you going to be talking about? Childhood and things that happened as a young woman.
So the book really starts. The prologue is a very quick glimpse of my life from childhood to when I survived suicide at age 20. And then it goes into how I ended up getting married, and I spend the next 30 years creating my living blueprint. I get married, I have my children, and I am married for 25 years. I get divorced. I go on a solo international journey to Morocco and Paris. I come back, and my husband and I, my children's father and I, we actually rekindle, we get remarried, and we are deliciously happy after 30 years of working on this relationship.
Well, I have to say, that's just a very enticing story to want to read already. And relationships, particularly a love relationship with the significant other, is probably the most difficult thing any human being can do. Because as people grow, they grow in different directions sometimes that are almost untenable. But then if there's, like, it sounds like in your case, there was a spark there or a seed of what was great that you were not willing to let go of. Eventually you went, oh, I'm going to assume this. You went, now I remember why we loved each other way back when.
Well, Bob, we loved each other, but we just had so many non-working behaviors in our relationship. And I was dealing with a lot of sexual trauma, and he is a young husband. You don't have the skills to deal with that. You don't know how to deal with that stuff. And so we had 4 children. We both worked so hard for so many years, and it just came to a point. After 25 years, he said to me, I said, we have got to do something different. He said, this is who I am. Take me or leave me. And I said, I cannot stay here. And so, but we never stopped loving each other. We just couldn't figure out how to make it work. And I just was unwilling to keep doing these non-working behaviors. And in actuality, me finally standing up and saying, this isn't okay, I regained my power. I regained my voice. And through that experience, I truly learned to love myself. And it's interesting because I will never forget being, I remember being in Morocco, and I was laying in one of the beds in the hostel, and I could smell the spices, and I could see the colors, the purples and the reds and the orange. And I just was laying in that bed, having no idea what was going to happen with my life. I just knew that I was in the unknown. I was just trusting my source of inspiration. I was trusting my personal guidance system, which I absolutely trust. I talk about that a lot in the book. I knew that something would work out at some point because I just knew that it would. I am a believer. I have faith. It's one of my gifts. And so I just knew it would work out. And the love that I learned to cultivate for myself allowed me to then choose back into that relationship. And he had his own healing journey through the divorce. And so totally gave a spoiler away, but this book is more about somebody creating their living blueprint than my story. I just share my story to show people that I've been there. I know what it feels like to lose everything, to feel like there's, to lose everything, but still you have a choice. You get to create your happily ever after.
If you're willing to risk, and when you're risking, you don't even really realize what you're risking. You just know you can't do the thing you were doing the way you were doing it anymore. That's worse. You go, if I keep doing this, I've had a number of things like that where some of it has to do with work and relationships in the past and, different things where I went, well, as much as I had hoped it would play out this way, it didn't. So what am I going to do? Am I going to stay with something that's just not working? And everything is sort of a percentage game. If something's working, in the high 90s, you're going to keep it, and I'm aiming high because most things aren't even close to the high 90s. But if it's, it's kind of like, what am I willing to tolerate in terms of the things I don't like, as opposed to the things that make it really worthwhile. And, I've had things where I was thinking about one particular job I had, that when it ended, I was walking down the street. I got fired from this job that I hated, but I nevertheless felt pretty bad because I got fired. And I was walking down the street going, oh my God, I feel like I just got out of prison. This is fantastic. I'm weirded out and I'm damaged from the abusive situation, work situation. But I remember thinking, this is, I'm exaggerating, but this must be what it feels like if being locked up for a number of, and it was only like a year that I had this job. But when I got out and was walking in the sunlight in the day, because I'd been in an office, and I just was like, I can never do that way again. I won't allow myself to do that. So it was a big moment, and it was born out of desperation, to not feel like crap.
I think those moments are so key important because you will never forget that feeling of being free. And I feel like we all have those little moments in our life. And I rely on those moments. Those moments are part of my personal guidance system because, I know what it feels like to feel free. I know what it feels like to be in my parasympathetic nervous system. I know what it feels like to not be hypervigilant. And those things, I know what it feels like to truly love myself, to be loved by somebody else. And those things become all of the checkpoints of our personal guidance system, which is the only way, which is the reason that I could go. I could step into the unknown because I trusted my personal guidance system so much. I think one of the things I see right now in our world is people are living in the unknown, but they don't have a personal guidance system. They don't have something that they really can hang on to or that they totally trust. But I believe that most of us, if we'll take the time to look at what has worked in the past and what are those checkpoints, we can start to connect the dots. And even in the unknown, we get a compass, we get direction from that information.
I was wondering if while you were sort of headed toward this place of, traveling and getting away from the situation, had you been living somewhat on the basis of what expectations were placed, or what expectations you thought were required of you as a wife, a mother, a woman? I don't know what you did for work, if you were working at that time, but because I think there's a lot of demands on people, real or imagined, that can really impact how we feel, and the have tos and that kind of stuff, which, it's all artificial, but they're so real when you are constantly bombarded with it.
Absolutely. In fact, I can remember when I was in Paris. So I don't speak French. I had never been to Paris before. And I remember when I was placed in this situation where I had no reference points. I didn't know, I couldn't read the maps. I didn't know how to get to my hotel. I didn't know the currency. So every reference point I had was gone. And all that was left was me, like me. And I literally felt all of those layers of me, all of the masks, all of the expectations, all the labels, everything just melted off me. Literally, I felt it happen. And I would just I just walked freely. This essence of me, this being who I am, after I was 50 years old at this time, that was so freeing to no longer have all of those, mostly the expectations of myself and the labels that I had allowed myself to put on myself and I had allowed other people to put on me.
Were you communicating with your kids while you were gone?
Yes. So my youngest child was a ballroom dancer, and what I was in college, and my youngest child was dancing at the World Championships in Blackpool, England. And so I had 1 month between, and I had made $10,000 from painting murals. And my youngest child was traveling. So I thought, what? And I was in school for art history. And so I thought, I'm going to go to Paris and I'm going to study the masters. And so I had $10,000 that I had saved. So I just had that month, and then I met my child at the ballroom dancing at the World Championships in Blackpool, England. And then my child and I traveled for a little bit, and then I came home for the summer. I had my oldest son had his grandson, or his son, and then I was back and forth with my children, and even with my children's father, who is now my husband. But we still had family activities. It was very amicable divorce. It was so absolutely necessary for me. But one of the reasons I want to share this book, because I don't think it's necessary to have quite such a drastic break. I just had to do that by the time I was 50. And I feel like we as humans, if we'll allow ourselves, we can have a more gradual coming to ourselves than having it be so abrupt at 50.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do what you're talking about. And yours was very dramatic, which I kind of find really fascinating. What I was just thinking about was, is there anything in the book your kids or your husband didn't know about that you put in the book where they went, "Oh, Mom, I didn't know"?
Oh, Bob, that's a great question. You're the first person who's asked me that question on any podcast. So I will tell you, nobody knew my whole story until this book was written. Nobody. And it did not go over super well with some of the closest people in my life.
What? They went, what?
They said, take me out of the book.
Oh, that kind of stuff.
They said, take me out of the book. And so that was rough. I knew that I was putting it on the line, but this is who I am. I mean, this is who I am. This is what I've experienced. This is my living blueprint. This is the truth of who I am. And so but it was interesting because after that happened, so, you have the whole writing process where you get your first draft, you send it to beta readers, the beta readers read it, you get it back, you work on it again, and then you send it to reviewers. But that process, when I had some pretty harsh negative feedback in the very beginning, it really switched the book, because once again, I had kind of fallen into that need for validation. And when I heard such negative feedback, again, I had to go back to the essence of who am I? This is my truth. This is who I am. And so, I was very careful and I'm very respectful. My husband said, you couldn't have been any nicer than you were in this book. You're so forgiving in this book for things that have happened. But it is my truth.
Well, that's the thing about the truth. That's all it can be. It's true or it's not true. And I mean, I guess there's versions of it that people and their perceptions, but if something happens and it's your truth, denying it makes you sick. It actually makes you ill to live outside of that. And so I don't really see much of a choice, but some people don't want to rock the boat, or they don't want to be embarrassed, and, too bad. It's part of it. Like you said, people got upset. Were they like people that had done pretty bad things, and you've said, you put it in the book and they went, take me out, I don't want to be seen this way? Or is it something else?
You know what? I actually think that it was more they didn't want me to be hurt. I think that they were more afraid of, I cannot believe you're going to put this out there. I cannot believe you're going to be this vulnerable. Are you really going to share these things that you've been through? I have some beautiful spiritual gifts, and I've had some incredible spiritual experiences that have kept me up, that are part of my personal guidance system. And they just were really, they could not believe that I was going to share some of those. And I feel like some of those gifts that I've been given are not just for me. They are for me to share. And I'll just tell you one thing. In 2019, a dear, dear friend died by suicide. And the day after he died, he came back to me and he said, you have to share how you learn to live, how you learn to ask for help, how you learn to be honest no matter what, and how you learn to connect to love. Because in 1989, I had survived suicide. And so people could not believe that I was going to put that in there, that I was actually going to claim that somebody had come back to me. But I did. Chapter 10 is my conversation with my friend, and what he told me and what he shared with me about his choice.
I've had similar experiences, so I understand what you're saying. It wasn't a conversation per se. But when my son was born, I had a friend that had committed suicide, and we were pretty close. We were kind of like brothers, and we met in, I think, the 9th grade, and we stayed really close, and we went to college together, and I didn't really know what was going on with him, but he had a lot of, I think, embarrassment about what was going on with him. And so he didn't really share it with me, but it happened. And at the time, my wife was pregnant. And so when she had to have a C-section, and we were in the place where they do that, I guess you'd call it an operating room, but I don't know. I don't like to call it that. But I felt him there. He was there. I didn't say anything. We get home from the hospital, a few days later, whatever. And my wife said, Bill was in the room.
Oh.
And I go, yeah, I know. Oh, I'm getting teary. So he was there. he was watching, he was helping, whatever he was doing. And so it was corroborated. this thing that I knew had happened, had happened to her too.
Wow.
And then there was another time where I forget in what way it came to me, whether it was in a one of those between dream and wake states where they're more like experiences than they are dreams.
Yes.
But it's not like the conventional waking state. And he said, I made a mistake. He told me he made a mistake. He felt that he had made a mistake. And I think he was having kind of a hard time transitioning to not being alive, and in between that and wherever we go when we leave the body. But he's okay. It happened. Eventually that kind of went away. And he, and they say the souls, come and help the living. And that's certainly what was going on in that room when my son was born. So yes, I mean, I don't know what form the conversation took, if you were just sort of sitting in a chair and you could hear it or feel it. And it was, not, maybe not out loud. You just knew it was going on. That's how I would sort of picture it, but I'm sure it's in the book and people can find out.
It is in the book. And it is one of the most powerful points of my own personal guidance system.
So basically he was saying, what it sounds like to me is, had I done what I'm asking you to do, maybe I would still be here.
Well, it's interesting because the year before he passed, I had a dream. And in that dream, and I talk about this in the book as well, in that dream, there were a lot of things that led up to this that, of course, until it had happened, I didn't connect all these things together. But then in retrospect, I can see all the dream I had, that I shared it with him the year before. And then he had, all of these little things that had happened. And we don't really realize either ourselves or for someone else when we're really at that edge, when we have reached that point when we're really done. And he was hurting. I mean, he was frantic. He did not realize the finality of his choice when he did it.
I always wonder if this is being more on a spiritual level or whatever, that what if, life is so painful you want to check out, but what if that actually doesn't relieve the pain? I wonder about that sometimes. What if it's like because my friend said I made a mistake, and maybe it relieved some of it. But if you think you made a mistake, maybe it didn't relieve it all. Or maybe, and I don't know. I don't know how the brain works. I mean, sometimes brains get hijacked by who knows what, you can't really blame anybody for having that situation because, there's actual diseases that kind of hijack the brain. And then there's, who knows what it is. Obviously traumatic events are a big trigger for people to want to check out. It makes complete sense to me, but you wonder, because you think there's no hope. That's what, what extinguishes all hope, and what is the difference between that person and the person who is so miserable they want to check out, but they still have that little spark where they go, well, it's a little bit, it's going to last a long time if I kill myself. It's just really going to last a long time. So maybe I won't. Maybe I'll give it another day. So I don't know what that difference is between the person that makes the choice and one that doesn't. Which would sort of bring me to the question, like when you said you survived it, do you think that was a choice you made on something, or it was kind of a luck? I don't know really how to, it's sort of an uncomfortable thing to talk about with somebody, I think, but you seem like you're willing to go there a little bit.
I am totally willing. And I think that it's something that so needs to be talked about, because millions of people are dealing with suicidal thoughts. I was just thinking 700, I'm just reading this statistic out of my book, 700,000 individuals completed suicide in 2021. Um, the CDC says that 12.3 million adults contemplate suicide, 3.5 million made a plan, and 1.7 million people attempted to end their lives in 2021. That's a lot of people in our lives, a lot of people who are going to that edge. And my own experience, I had been in so much pain for my whole life. And I talked about that in the prologue. I just wanted everything to go black. I didn't necessarily want to die. I had no understanding of anything beyond just wanting the pain to stop. And for me, because of how I believe that it was divine intervention, that somebody came home, they weren't supposed to be there, and my partner came home and found me and then took me to the emergency room. But for me, it was alcohol and drugs were involved. There's a lot of things that I've read that have talked about how the people that they've talked to who have made this choice and who have lived, that they always regret the choice. They always regret it. The second they make it, they regret it. And I also read something that if we can just make it through 10 minutes, there's just this point where you just kind of lose your consciousness. It's like you're mentally not really there. And if you could just get through 10 minutes of that really stressful feeling, whatever's happening. But again, I'm going to go back and say, I think that when we reach that point, lots of times I don't really think we realize that we're so low. In my book, I have something called the How Am I scale. And I created this a long time ago with one of my children because this child was not a communicator. They didn't really like to talk, but I really needed to know how they were doing. And so I said, on a scale from 1 to 10, how are you? Now, are you a 6? Are you a 2? Are you a 9? Where are you today? And over the years, I started using this How Am I scale, because if you really check in, okay, and 1 is you're at the end. You have a plan. You are checking out. That's where your mind is at. This How Am I scale is something it's what I use with clients. I use it with my partner and children. But when somebody starts telling me I'm a 2 today, and that 2, or I'm a 1, and that is going on and on for days, then that starts to turn into, okay, how am I going to check out of here? So I think that self-awareness and that communication and having some way to communicate, even when we are really feeling low, is key to saving lives.
A lot of it is too that people keep it a secret. Like with my buddy, I didn't know what he was going through. I had no idea. He'd been seeing a therapist and he was on medication. I didn't know any of this stuff. It was a separate thing that he kept that way.
But we all have that line, right, Bob? We all have the line in us, this line that we share with everyone. And then there's this line of all of this stuff down here that we don't talk about, that we actually are having these separate conversations just with ourselves. And we talk about it in this book. In the book, his name is Nick, but we talk about that line. He was having these separate conversations. There was a whole dialogue going on inside of him that nobody else was hearing. And so that's one of the checkpoints. I mean, are you having these conversations with yourself? Do you have a dialogue, a secret dialogue that you're not sharing?
Not very productive, because you have nothing to bounce it off of except yourself. So it spins. And once you start going down that rabbit hole, it's really hard to climb out of it. To have somebody or some situation that you can be in to talk to and tell the truth, a safe place to tell the truth. That's what a gift that is, and many folks don't grow up in homes where that is the case. When you think about the playground when you're in like elementary school and middle school, it's just cruel. It's just nobody's telling the truth. Everybody's, jockeying for position, and there's hierarchy and cliques, and, there's not a whole lot of these, with your peers at that age. And that's a really vulnerable age too, because you're physically changing, going from childhood into puberty, and then you've got all this insecurity. So, and I would think that's all. And a lot of times that is a really vulnerable age.
At that same time, I remember it was New Year's Eve, and I remember looking around, I was in the bar and looking around, and everyone was laughing but I don't know, I just had this sense. Everyone was laughing and everyone seemed like they were having a good time, but I had this deep sense that it actually wasn't true, that people weren't so happy and people weren't having such a great time. And I often think about that. Speaking of vulnerability, thinking about telling the truth, because that moment is, one of those checkpoints on my personal guidance system where I really had to check in. Am I laughing? Am I putting on a mask here? Am I acting a way that's being expected of me? Am I being completely truthful?
Well, you wonder how much of what you're seeing is actually the case, that and then or how much of it is being colored by your own unhappiness in that moment too. It's like, well, if I feel this way, then these people must be lying. Some of them aren't. Some of them are actually really enjoying themselves.
Right.
I don't know how they did it, but they did it. Well, I'll tell you what I used to do. I used to say, well, they just don't see things clearly. They're not very intelligent. So that's the only reason they feel that good. That was how my ego sort of handled that, some sort of a trickery of insightful superiority. That I spent a lot of time wasted thinking that way too. And I always envied people that were genuinely joyful. I couldn't understand it. I'd look at them. I like, this appears to be real, and I actually know you a little bit, and this does seem to be real, and so we won't be hanging out.
Kind of full circle back. I feel like one of the best ways to know if you're being real and if someone else is being real is to be vulnerable, because if someone else is being real and you're being real, you can be vulnerable together, and you can feel that's not something you can fake. There comes a point in the conversation where you're either going to dive in together or not. That's great information for any relationship that we're in.
And to make assumptions about other people is hugely unproductive, and usually they're wrong.
For me, a lot of it has been letting go of judgment of myself, of others, because I find that if I'm judging, I'm either better or worse than someone else, and it's so unproductive. So it's so unproductive. It's so unproductive to judge myself. It's so unproductive to judge someone else. And so just experiencing what is with myself, taking everything as information, and then choosing, like actively choosing from the information that I get with myself or with relationship. And I've always been really hard on myself. I tend to always judge myself as less than. And so that was very unproductive for most of my life. And so to be in a space now where I feel pretty neutral, I feel pretty neutral, and working hard to not go into that space of judgment, because for me, it's very unproductive.
I'm noticing as I've gotten older that when people get older, they can really get more judgmental because they've seen a lot and they've made their choices, and they really have this sort of entrenched kind of belief system, and you see a lot of people really digging in on, well, this is that and this is this, and they're upset and they're angry, and then you get the other people that have aged, and they realize what you've realized, which is that it's pointless to waste time judging, because if you've seen it a lot and done a lot, and just pure life experience, you realize that anything can happen to anybody, and anything, and that you don't know, you just don't really know until you've walked in their shoes, I guess, and it's So, and the other thing is pain is invisible. So you don't really know what kind of pain somebody is in unless you know them really, really well. You just don't know. And sometimes people are acting in ways that are not very nice, but underneath that there's something going on that's painful for them. They're afraid, or they're really unhappy about something, or they feel, cheated by life, or not heard. Those are real things that, and I've seen some of my friends who, not a lot of them, because they're pretty great people, most of them, but I have a few that have really become difficult to be around, and some of their beliefs are so harsh, and judgmental. And I'm thinking, well, what's going on with you that you're spending this kind of time and energy finger pointing, and as if the thing you're pointing the finger at, if that changes, then you're going to be okay. I don't think so.
One of the things for me, being a mother, has taught me a lot of mental flexibility, that especially with my children, I am their mother, I'm not their judge. And I often remember that. It's my job to love them. And so that really, for me, ripples out to the whole world. And I felt that I had that understanding before my children became adults and before they started getting to make all their own choices. But that really solidified in me when my children grew up and went different ways than I had taught them. When I went different ways than I had taught them, because I think that when we hang on so tight to what we know, what we believe, some people that works for them. But for me, I had to learn that mental flexibility to just trust my personal guidance system, trust what I know to be true, and really let go of a lot of those expectations that I was hanging on to. I feel like it makes a lot of people sick, that they are just hanging on so tightly and pointing the finger and so angry, so inflexible, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Well, it's frightening to them to see people not behaving to their expectations or their desires, especially kids. It's that's a whole other thing, because you have to guide them when they're little and set boundaries and enforce rules in your home. You have to do that, or they're just it can't function. I'm not saying it's cruelty. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying clear boundaries, and you can't do that in this house. That's just not acceptable. And that's a different thing than letting them be who they are, and doing things that you may not think are really that great. As long as it doesn't impinge on me, I'm like, go ahead, see, here's my experience. If you want to hear it, if you don't, I'll keep it to myself. So, I would say that nobody does what I want them to. Not one person. There's nobody.
I don't even always do what I want me to.
No.
So how can I expect anyone else to do what I want them to?
Right. Yeah. I look at myself like, I'm okay. I'm not really a fan. I'm all right. Who are these people that think they're amazing? I feel good about what I do, and I like myself most of the time, but I'm not like going, hey, look at me. I'm amazing.
I say in the book that I like the person I'm becoming. I finally, after 50 years, learned how to love myself, to allow myself to feel love for myself. Even though I knew I loved my children, even though I knew Jesus loved me, that's my source of inspiration. It was after I was 50 before I actually felt love for myself, which I think it's really sad. I think that to live half my life without really feeling self-love, I really hope that I can support people in getting there quicker than I did. But that's a really good feeling to have, to just self-love, and then to like who I'm becoming, to look in the mirror and like who I am showing up as in the world. You know, there's a lot of things that I want to do differently, but I remember I have such clear memories of not loving myself, of not liking that person that I saw in the mirror, that the contrast is still very clear in my mind. So I'm grateful for that today.
You mentioned you talk to your clients. What is that that you do with clients? Who are your clients? What are you actually doing?
I am a soul guide. I have a soul guided coaching business. Is I really approach working with individuals from their soul, from my soul to their soul. And I have a lot of different processes, a lot of different things that I can do that really support a person in getting in touch with who they are, not all the masks, not all the expectations, not all the labels.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that place, from them, the truth of who they are, then really helping them to understand their own personal guidance system, figuring out what their biochemistry needs, what does their body need, and really giving them the skills and the tools so that they are guiding their own life. Of course, I can give them a lot of advice or things that I've done, but really what I've found in my life, that as I am centered on who I am and on my personal guidance system, that never leads me wrong. And so that's really what I try to help other people do, anyone I'm working with. And one of the reasons I was so excited to write the book is because I always felt, Bob, like my sessions were putting out fires, like we were just dealing with crisis. But I really wanted to share once after my friend came back to me, and after this got so clear to me in my mind, this template that I had lived by, which I just did intuitively. But then when I started writing it down, it became so clear how I had come from 1989, surviving suicide, to deliciously happy in 2020, which is when I started this. I wanted to be able to give this to somebody. I wanted to be able to help somebody actually gain traction towards their own happily ever after, instead of just putting out fires, because I believe in happily ever after. I believe that that is possible for anyone. And regardless of what's happened in the past, regardless, I feel like we all can live at our potential. Wherever we're at right now, we can make a choice. We can heal. We can live at our personal highest potential, right? You know, we can figure that out. And that's what I try. That's what I help people to do, is to live from their highest potential.
Sometimes it's just a matter of starting with giving somebody permission to do it. Some people don't feel like they're allowed to do that. There's some kind of I'm sure it's going for myself, some kind of a feeling like there's two things. If I do that, I'll be too vulnerable and I'll be destroyed. And there is another thought that, and this is an actual Yiddish word. It's kenahora is the word. And basically what it means, the simple version of this, and I don't know if this is particularly only for Jewish people, because I don't think it is, but the word for it means, don't get too happy. God will see it, take it away, and then more. Take away even more. It's a really I don't know where that comes from. I mean, I understand an oppressed group of people, historically oppressed, would feel that way because things repeatedly, particularly in that history, were oppression and things get taken away, you know. But I think a lot of people actually feel that way. They feel that I have to be on guard, and if I show too much joy, the universe or even other people will see that and hate it and take it away, and then maybe even go further. It's an interesting concept that there's actually a word for it in that culture, but and maybe there's another word. Maybe that there's another word for it in other cultures. I don't really know.
Bob, I don't honestly, I've thought about this a lot because I've had multiple people ask me where did I get my belief? But I have always believed since I had conscious thought, I guess since I became a mother, because I didn't believe this before I survived suicide. And then 6 months after I survived suicide, I got pregnant with my son. And sometime in there between becoming pregnant with my son, but sometime in that time, I gained this belief that there's enough love for everyone, that we were born for joy, that there is an infinite amount of love. I believed that. And honestly, with not really a lot of evidence, it was more from my soul, that my soul believed this. Because quite honestly, that is not what life showed me to that point.
Mm-hmm.
However, now at 55, I absolutely believe that. And I absolutely have the evidence in my own life that says there is enough love for everyone. There is joy for you. If you want it, it's available. I have experienced so much sadness and so much loss, but the joy is available. And it's also where, I don't know about other people, but that's where I'm the most vulnerable. My most joyful state is my most vulnerable state.
I relate to that. I know exactly what you're saying.
And so you're in that joy, and yes, that feeling is, well, actually, no, I'm not even, that thought that you were just saying is there somewhere, but in that pinnacle of joy, that fear is not there. When you're in that joy, you're just experiencing joy. And I think one of the things that has supported me in the last 5 years and really experiencing it is the amount of failure that I felt in my divorce, the amount of failure I felt in things that happened in my life. There comes a point where there's nothing to lose. Losing my marriage was so difficult for me, choosing divorce. And you'll read in the book, there's a lot of loss. My brother in 2017 died. Then my soul brother ended his life. But there's healing. And there is joy after. One of my favorite sayings, I've never written this children's book, but I've always wanted to, is even when it's raining, the sun is always shining. That's how I live.
So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, I'm assuming you do some of this soul guidance over the magic of the internet. I'm assuming that.
I do.
Okay. How do people find you?
Zoom and all of that is all really nice now.
Fantastic.
WendyBeth.org. I have
WendyBeth.org. Okay.
WendyBeth.org. And if you want the book, it's Living Blueprint, a true story. Wendy Beth Living Blueprint on Amazon. And actually, I just found out yesterday some other companies have them, but I don't know how to get those. But I know you can get the book on Amazon.
Well, you type it into Google, you'll find all the spots.
It'll come up.
Yeah, you don't have to know anything. You just have to know how to spell Wendy Beth.
Wendy
That's
Beth,
it.
Living Blueprint.
Okay.
Find me.
Well, I appreciate your time and you opening your heart and your vulnerability
Oh,
and all the wonderful things you're doing for other people and for yourself. It's really been a lovely afternoon for me. I hope you feel the same.
thank you, Bob. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate your time.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. The YouTube channel is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Wendy Beth for being on the show. And please check out her book. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Living Blueprint, A True Story. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.